Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organizational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. Welcome to Two Homes. In today's episode, I'm exploring the concept of compliance and that compliance alone won't save the planet. It seems like sustainability and ESG are in every conversation at the moment. And with all these frameworks and reporting, I wonder if we're still just a long way off being actually sustainable. And I don't think it's because people aren't trying, certainly not from the conversations I've been having. I am fortunate. I work in a 6-star green rated building. That alone, though, has made me reflect on the gap that perhaps exists between what is designed and what actually happens in the day-to-day. The way systems are there, but at the individual business level are not necessarily used. The air conditioner is freezing. The intention is clear, but the experience doesn't always match the intention. So I'm not sharing this as a criticism because there is a lot of good work happening. And when I reflect on how things were 11 years ago, when I first started off in this space, we've definitely made some inroads. But it does highlight to me that there is still a gap. And I sometimes wonder whether we're spending more time now measuring sustainability than actually integrating it. In the early days of my business, I encountered something that I feel connects with this system that I feel we're part of at the moment. So in the early days where I set up, I was living in Cambodia. If you've heard my story, you know that. And if you've ever been to Cambodia, it is usually pretty clear that there are a lot of NGOs, a lot of charities. And so one of the choices I needed to make was whether I was going to register Plastic Free Southeast Asia as an NGO or as a business. And one of the deciding factors for me was that if I registered as an NGO, then I'd need to hire a fundraising coordinator to raise money to do the work we needed to do. And it felt like we'd end up spending more time raising money and less time on actually creating sustainable outcomes. So I can't help wondering if we've fallen into that trap with sustainability at the moment. Office towers like the one that I work in have a lot of different companies. So I'm just in like one business amongst many. And I also wonder about the consistency across the different companies. The place I work out of is a B Corp. I don't even know fully all of the other businesses in the building. So I'm really just, theorizing here. But I wonder how many reports are filed and then how it shows up actually in their day-to-day. What I'm really keen to be part of, one of the reasons why I've started this podcast, is I would love to be part of a more elevated conversation. Can we move beyond compliance to more blue sky thinking? What if we looked beyond the reports, beyond trying to find solutions in innovation or tech to solve this? Because what I see is that there are a lot more simpler alternatives that are already available. I feel like if compliance was the answer, we'd already be sustainable. So whilst we've got a heap of compliance already, and there's more coming, is it really enough when it comes to the kind of action we need to see? It does create action. We've moved from thin plastic bags to thicker plastic bags. That was change. But it doesn't necessarily create ownership, and it doesn't seem like a real solution to me. It feels more like obligation, and the engagement piece that I've seen work so well seems to be missing. I mean, it can move things up the priority list. It does start conversations. It develops minimum standards, but it often comes with drag or dread or fear and a sense of just doing the bare minimum because it's required, not because of any other reason. Which means that the changes created from compliance are done under pressure, and it's not a behavior of choice. So there's less enthusiasm and less consistency in application. When I look at systems and customers' journey in the business, the customer will take the path of least resistance. This is why I feel that putting the onus onto individuals to recycle better, to bring their own coffee cups, to remember the shopping bag, it's a little unfair when the system is stacked against that very behavior. And as someone who has been proactively functioning in this space for such a long time, it can be really frustrating to try and do the right thing but not get the result, especially when the wording is about, hey, hang up your towel and we won't replace it, and then it's replaced. That's one example. So I see that when there's things like a report due, an audit due, a certification attainment, things ramp up a bit, but then when the pressure drops, they fall back to the system. And the system will kind of find its way to hit that minimum viable requirement. Case in point, the plastic bag example that I touched on a moment ago, that there was this huge conversation piece in New South Wales, for the New South Wales plastic bag ban in particular, I'm thinking of. It was much more peaceful in Adelaide back in 2009. But to me, it's like the usage is completely the same now. It's just that we've moved from flimsy plastic bags to thicker plastic bags or paper bags. But the volume is still huge, and it's still pretty much the same as it was before. The systems find their way around the rules. So compliance has technically been met, but functionally it kind of hasn't solved the problem. So whilst legislation will catch the laggards up to the bare minimum, if we really want to lead by example, be the change, make this a priority, we can't wait for the law to dictate what we're going to do. I noticed this during my experience in Cambodia, and I'm so grateful to have had that experience, to be able to see that perspective. What was clear to me after my research period, after many conversations with many different people and organizations, is that the reality on the ground, trying to appeal to individuals to take action where there was no real reward for doing so, would be hard. Government had some great policies, but not enough, and not applied or integrated in a way that was visible, and a very different system to the one we see here in Australia, in terms of funding and priorities. That's changed now. I'm really happy to say that that's changed now, but at the time. And so the gap to me at that time was to work with businesses to get more people in the room who perhaps wouldn't opt in on an individual level, but as a team, as a company, felt safer to do so. So when I started Plastic Free Southeast Asia, we started doing workshops on single-use plastic reduction for tourism and hospitality teams, and even in the education sector, working with staff. I chose to lead with that over appealing to the individual and over waiting for the government to go first. And it's sometimes really necessary for these things to happen. Again, comparatively in Australia, it has actually been the citizen movements that have pushed regulation to move. But regulation, like if it's not urgent, if you've listened to episode number 2, we've got short-term political cycles. So unless it's going to win votes, um, you know, legislation is sort of only going to do what's really urgent. And waiting for that means delayed impact. So systems can move faster than policies. And whilst I had no idea how impactful that was going to be at the time, I'm so glad that that's the path that was illuminated for me. That working with businesses that were proactive and keen to get going, despite the fact that they had no real incentive to do so, was inspiring and continues to inspire me, because I really feel in a lot of different ways that Southeast Asia are so receptive and motivated to do well in this space. And what I've seen is the most successful in this is the cultural integration over compliance. Even when I think of like my first visit to Bali back in 2019, I think, the conversations I had there around single-use plastics, it seemed very integrated. People knew on the ground why plastic straws in particular and some other single-use plastics were no longer being used. And it really felt like it had come from the people rather than through the law. What I see on more of an individual business level is when the team are involved, when they understand why, when they're part of coming up with the solutions, when they have the knowledge to be able to make nuanced decisions. That's embodied sustainability, and that provides more consistency and more effectiveness over time than anything else I've seen. Integrity in sustainability isn't doing everything. It's doing what you say you're doing. And it isn't rigid, it's nuanced. And when the teams have that agency, when they have the default system is the reusable system, it's the more sustainable system, then they can be flexible for individual scenarios as well. When they've got the why, when they're involved in that decision-making process, when they're engaged in what's going on, then things shift. Currently, the default system across a lot of hospitality and tourism is the single-use option, because it's always been that way. It's a strong system. But what if the default system was the reusable? So when I think about what kind of legislation around sustainability is there in tourism that's actually done well, I come up a little bit empty-handed. We've definitely removed the single-use plastic straws, but there's still a lot of single-use. There are more legislation coming that will impact the tourism sector, but when it comes to a sustainability baseline led by regulation and compliance in the sustainability space, I have not come across anything that's a standout. There's a lot of certification schemes, and these are becoming more popular, but they are still voluntary uptake. What signal is that sending? And look, I'm really pleased that certifications that are optional have become so popular. It is part of the journey for actually implementing and embedding sustainability in a way that makes a difference. For now, it is possibly more robust than any sort of compliance and legal frameworks. We'll talk more about upcoming legal requirements in a moment. And then it was fantastic to see recently that Tourism Australia are now putting some momentum behind this as well. It's still opt-in, but when the industry as a whole starts to look at things together, I think we can really make some progress. So it will start to bring more of the forerunners into this, and there are definitely a lot out there. They tend to be more of the small independent operators that are doing really thoughtful, considered sustainability action across the board. I'm not saying it's only them, but yes, it will still be these sort of real early adopters, but there will be a bit more of a mass collective accumulation of this now that Tourism Australia are putting some substantial energy behind it. Okay, so there's many of these frameworks and schemes, largely optional for the hotel or operator to buy into. But with those, why is it still that there is some mismatch in the promise and the delivery? And you'll hear me say this a lot. I think that a lot of it comes down to engagement, and I've got an upcoming episode that's going to talk about the burden, the heaviness, the substantial amount of this work that's carried by individual sustainability managers or voluntary sustainability managers in the space. The big gap, it's great to have a framework, but if only one or two people in the organisation are working on it, it's going to be really hard for that to filter through into all of the operational aspects that are required to deliver on the promise of those frameworks or certifications. Honestly, this is the big opportunity. This is the big gap that I see. It's one of those things like when you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think it needs to be this way as we're on this journey of maturing in our awareness, knowledge, and application of sustainability. I used to think that it was frustrating, that it was annoying, but I think it's part of the process. And that as much as we know that environmental care and social governance is important and it should be going faster, it is the nature of things that we need to go through certain iterations and certain processes, and that they will happen in their own time, that they are in process, that when we look back to 10 years ago, progress has been made. And sometimes when we're in it, when we're in the day-to-day, it's hard to see that progress. So yes, it may feel slow and frustrating, and it may be sitting in silos at the moment. However, I think this is part of the process, and where we want to get to next is that fully integrated, operationalized sustainability that everybody in the organization understands. And I'm really excited to see how this continues to evolve, because I feel like this is the next level that we're working towards, that the impetus on ESG and policy and reporting and all of these things, they certainly help us see kind of where the general sense is at, and that the next opportunity is really in integrating it, because the policies and the legislation have set the direction, but now it's up to us to take it up a level and actually do what's written on those policy papers and actually demonstrate and act out what's been written on paper. And yeah, that's really the opportunity that we see now. And so if we can bridge that gap, we've got all these tools, right? We've got all of the tools available to us. I believe we have all of the solutions at hand. What we need to do is bring more of our teammates to the table to support those working in risk and compliance, or those working in pure sustainability roles, or those working across a whole range of different things, or those teams that are voluntary teams who have put their hand up to do this work on top of their job that they're paid for. When we can start to broaden the conversation, to be part of that conversation, to listen to what they have to say, and to start to engage our own ideas into that as well. This is where what's written on the policy paper comes to life. So I don't think it's that we can not have compliance. There needs to be compliance. It doesn't necessarily need to be at the legal level, though. It can be at the company level. And then providing the right pathways, the right opportunities, and the consistency to ensure that people understand, that are involved in driving the direction of policies, in creating them. When people create something, when they're involved in the creation process, there's a lot more ownership and buy-in. There's a lot more incentive to follow through on what's been described. So let's think about how we can create policies with more inclusivity, involving more of the team, and how we can implement them by embedding them across the organization. That's when policies and reporting really start to shine. Because we need reporting. We need to be able to measure what's happening if we're going to improve it. And we need to be able to track our changes and development along the way. But most importantly, we need to bring our people into the story, into the picture. Without people, a policy means nothing, and a report on what's happened falls flat. Okay, so let's do a sort of quick high-level audit on where the biggest sort of waste and opportunities are in tourism and where the gaps might be. So biggest parts of consumption in hotels is energy and water. We know that. Next biggest would be food waste, and then also looking at supply chains. So when we look at what's being wasted, it's really helpful to look upstream of that. So if we're looking at food waste, it's like, what does that food waste consist of? What are the inputs? Where is the waste being created? And the same for consumption of water and energy, the same for consumption of single-use plastics. Like, where are they being generated? Where can that system be influenced at the beginning rather than wondering what to do with the end waste product? And this comes up a lot. Was just looking at a LinkedIn conversation and talking about different recycling streams and so forth and so on. And it's like, why is it so complex and confusing? That's a conversation for another day. But the real question I'd love us to be asking more is, what's going in there and how can we prevent it to begin with? So with food waste being a really important one, I think it's useful here to note that there is more legislation on that coming. In New South Wales in particular, the EPA are bringing in new mandates on food organics waste collection starting from the 1st of July this year. So that's really soon. As with so many things, there is a staged approach. So it's going to start with the bigger organizations needing to become compliant, having separated organic waste separated at source from this year. The next phase down will be the 1st of July 2028, and then the final phase will be the 1st of July 2030. So that's going to impact tourism and hospitality businesses and many other businesses as well, but we'll keep that focus there because that's the area that I work in, the space that I work in for the most part. So looking at that, it's great to know that there's more legislation coming. This helps to underpin some conversation. It helps to get some movement here. But what it won't do, yes, source separation, what it won't do is cover that piece that I mentioned, which is looking at where is it coming from to begin with. Back in the day when I was still living in Adelaide, and actually even in my early days in Sydney, I volunteered for Oz Harvest. But in Adelaide in particular, we would pick up food from the end of market day at the Adelaide Central Markets on a Saturday that those sellers knew they wouldn't be able to sell between closing on the Saturday and the markets reopening on the Tuesday or the Wednesday. It's been a little while since I was in Adelaide. Anyway, the point being they're closed for a number of days. They had, fresh produce, and so donating it was a great way of moving it on, making sure that it got actually used rather than ending up in the bin. But what was amazing and what I believe continues to still be a problem is how much bread there was. And when we met with the donor recipients, they would often turn bread away because there was just too much. So that is a beautiful example of overproduction. Where can we look at that? Where can that be streamlined and save resources, save money, as well as saving waste at the other end? So how do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that there is some sense of trust? And how do we use what few regulations there are to create systems where those regulations are actually enforced and that people believe that what they're saying is what's actually happening? That is a question I don't have the answer to here today. But I think that there is a lot more discernment because people realize, oh, this says one thing, but then they're learning that it's not necessarily the case. So the consequences are despondency and despair and, perhaps a quiet moving away from different options or brands. Aside from that, we know that consistently, year on year, travelers continue to signal that they are interested in proper eco-friendly and sustainability action when they travel. So this isn't something that's going away. This is something that's important. So if there was one thing that I'd love every tourism business to change tomorrow, it wouldn't even be a rule or regulation. It wouldn't even be a certification. It would really be about working with the team and working it out together in the unique way that only you're able to in your unique culture and ecosystem in your business. That would be the dream. I've seen how beautiful this can be when it is actually done in a real business with real people. I've worked with teams who've done this, who've genuinely incorporated sustainability into their ethos, their culture, and their operating systems. And the enthusiasm they have, the continual drive to keep doing better, to outpace the compliance-driven demand is inspiring. I would love to see that more widespread. And it's not just because it feels good. It's not just because it's warm and fuzzy. There's also a very compelling commercial case for it. As I mentioned just a brief moment ago, energy and water are the biggest footprint items in a hotel. With energy prices increasing, with water scarcity relevant and very real in the current environment we're living in, the cost for access to these is going to continue to increase. Therefore, embedding this into how things are done is going to be critical to maintaining margins. And I don't mean placing this onus back on the guests. This is something that will come up because I see it so prevalently. This is not about telling guests to have shorter showers. It's not about telling guests to switch off the air conditioner when they leave their room or the lights off when they leave their room. No, it's about setting up the systems to enable the guest to do the best that they can, to make the smallest footprint that they can. And it's about the back of house operations, the water usage in cleaning, in the disconnect between communicating, don't wash my towels, and washing my towels. I use this example a lot because it really is something that's super relevant. So it's not just front of house. We need to look at the whole picture, the whole story. Where is water being used? Where is electricity being used? Where are there opportunities to streamline that, to measure it to begin with, to streamline it, and to go beyond just what is compliant for now? And we have a unique responsibility in this space. Tourism is special. It is amazing. People travel for the magic of seeing new environments and meeting new cultures. And largely, they also want to meet with nature, with community, with local markets. They're not looking for mass-produced, could be anywhere, disconnected from where they are, nature that's not cared about, that's commoditized. They're looking for genuine experiences, and the very industry that serves this market has a duty of care to protect the very thing it's promoting. Moving on from there, if you're listening to this and you feel like you're doing all of the right things, or you're trying to do all of the right things, but you keep hitting wall, what I want you to take away from this episode would be that you don't need to wait for legislation to take action. You only need to start a conversation. So if you haven't listened to it already, please go back and have a listen to episode 2. I talk a lot about leadership and regulated, inclusive leadership, and particularly how you can start with as little as 5 minutes in changing the sustainability conversation within the current frameworks, within the current operations, without adding burden onto your team, but actually adding opportunities to change this. And if that's one thing that I would encourage you to do, it would be that. That's where change begins. That's where we can start to focus on the power within that exists within our teams already and drawing that out and taking advantage of that and not being limited by current conditions or not wanting to take the first step or not knowing where to take the first step. You don't need to decide that all alone. You can actually in-source that from within your own business. So I will leave you there. I hope you'll join me again next time. This has been Two Homes, and I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes. Bye for now.